In the remote marshlands of southern Georgia, where the Spanish moss hangs heavy and the air smells like secrets, there once stood a house that the land itself seemed to reject. Locals called it Harrowsend, a sprawling, moss-choked estate with cracked white pillars and shutters that banged even when the wind was still. Its silhouette loomed like a forgotten god in the fog, a decaying reminder of the Harrow family's rise and their violent, whispered fall. But before we take you into the dark legacy of the Harrowsend family, do one thing. Subscribe to the Black Ledger for more hidden, untold stories from the shadows of history. And tell us in the comments, which state are you watching from? We're tracking how far these secrets travel. Now, back to Harrowsend. Most say the land was cursed long before a single brick was laid. Indigenous tribes avoided the area. Settlers lost livestock and children when they camped nearby. Still, in 1834, Elias Harrow, an ambitious land baron freshly returned from England, purchased the swampy acreage at a bargain. Locals warned him, but Elias believed in progress, not superstition. He and his wife, Margaret, built Harrowsend brick by brick, importing materials from Europe and slaves from nearby auctions. The estate was grand, lavish even, rumored to have gold-leaf ceilings and imported Italian chandeliers. Elias's children, 5 in all, were raised behind iron gates and under strict silence. The townsfolk rarely saw them, and when they did, the children looked pale, distant, like they were part of the house rather than the family. Elias made his fortune quickly. Cotton and cane sugar flooded from his fields, and the Harrow name became synonymous with wealth and influence. But so did the unease. People working on the grounds reported hearing Margaret humming to someone who wasn't there. Guests claimed entire rooms would go ice cold when Elias entered. And then there was the nursery. Locked for years, but sometimes, late at night, a faint lullaby could be heard drifting from its window. No one questioned the Harrows, not out loud, but everyone felt it. Something about that house was watching. By the time the Harrow family had settled fully into Harrowsend, whispers had already begun to crawl through the community like vines. Strange lights danced in the upstairs windows long after midnight. Carriage drivers claimed the estate's air turned colder as they neared the iron gate. Some said even the birds avoided flying over the house. Elias Harrow, once a sharp and measured businessman, began to withdraw from the world. He stopped attending town meetings. His visits to the plantation fields grew less frequent. When he did appear, his eyes looked darker, sunken and restless, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. His hands were often stained with something deep brown, which he passed off as ink. Margaret, once the proud and elegant matron of Harrowsend, became increasingly erratic. Servants gossiped that she would spend hours standing in front of mirrors, whispering to her reflection. One young maid, who worked there for only a month, swore she saw Margaret feeding something inside the walls. She never elaborated. The 5 Harrow children were kept out of sight. Only the eldest, Silas, occasionally accompanied Elias into town, and even then, he rarely spoke. The youngest daughter, Eliza, was rumored to have been born during a blood moon. She was pale, with eyes that never blinked long enough for comfort. No tutor stayed longer than a few weeks. One was said to have fled in the night, screaming about a door in the east wing that shouldn't have been there. And yet, despite all this, Harrowsend remained the jewel of southern aristocracy. Balls were held in the grand hall, champagne flowed, and laughter echoed, if only for show. The townspeople attended, but they never felt easy. There was a sense that every corner of the estate watched them, memorized them, judged them. Behind the polished facade, Harrowsend was rotting, and in that rot, something was waking. In 1851, a new kind of silence fell over Harrowsend, not the peaceful kind, but the tight-lipped hush of a household holding in a scream. Servants who once spoke in hushed tones now barely made eye contact. The estate's longtime groundskeeper, Henry, abruptly resigned, leaving behind only a note scrawled with the words, "The walls hear, the floor remembers. I will not be part of this." He was never seen again. Around this time, Margaret Harrow took to wearing only black. She claimed it was for mourning, though no one in town had died. She rarely left her room, and when she did, she carried a small silver locket clenched tightly in her palm. Some claimed it held a lock of hair from a child who had never been recorded in the family lineage. Others whispered it was a keepsake from someone, or something, buried beneath the house. There were stories of Elias digging late at night behind the stables, muttering in a language that wasn't English. One stable boy said he heard Elias arguing with someone, except no one else was there. That boy later fell from the top of the barn and broke his neck. His mother insisted he'd told her Elias had shown him something under the house. She left town that same week. Letters between Elias and his business partners stopped entirely. No shipments came or went from Harrowsend. The plantation ceased producing cotton, yet Elias remained visibly wealthy. The estate no longer ran on industry. It fed on something else. And still, the townspeople pretended not to notice. Denial was easier. Visiting Harrowsend became rare, and invitations were quietly declined. A line had been drawn between the Harrows and the world, and no one was brave or foolish enough to cross it. But one did. A young girl named Annabel, barely 20, took a position as a governess. No one ever saw her leave. Her brother came looking for her 3 weeks later. He found her shoes on the front porch. Nothing else. The case of Annabel Lorne was the first to make the local papers, though even then it was buried deep in the back pages under unconfirmed reports. Her brother, Thomas Lorne, insisted he'd filed a complaint with the sheriff's office after finding her shoes and a torn scrap of her journal on the Harrowsend porch. The sheriff, a man who'd been close to Elias for years, called it a lover's quarrel gone south. He advised Thomas to let the girl go, but Thomas didn't let go. He returned 2 more times, the last with a friend and a pistol. That friend, Gideon Pratt, later claimed that Harrowsend's front door opened by itself before they even knocked. Inside, the house was dark, candles lit but dim, the curtains drawn tight. The scent was overwhelming, mold, iron, and something sweet like rotting flowers. They didn't get far. According to Gideon, Thomas pushed deeper into the house while he waited near the door. Moments later, there was a crash from the second floor, followed by silence. Gideon called out, but Thomas never answered. Instead, the house moaned, wood and stone shifting like something was breathing. Terrified, Gideon fled, never stepping foot on the property again. He never spoke publicly about what he saw, but he left town the same week, reportedly checking into a sanitarium 2 states away. There, he was said to draw the same thing over and over in his journal. A figure, faceless and tall, with hands that stretched too long to belong to any man. Elias Harrow issued no statement. In fact, he wasn't seen for months afterward, nor were any of his children. For most, the case of Annabel faded into rumor, a sad tale of a girl who got too curious. But for others, it became a warning. Harrowsend was no longer just a decaying relic. It had a mouth, and it had begun to feed. By the winter of 1852, a sharp change swept across the neighboring towns. People stopped speaking the Harrow name aloud. Churches quietly removed the family from their prayer lists. A few brave preachers even called Harrowsend a hollow temple of Satan. But behind closed doors, everyone admitted the truth. They were scared. Of what exactly, no one could say. Only that the ground near Harrowsend felt wrong, like it pulsed beneath your boots if you stood still too long. A traveling photographer named Jebediah Knox arrived that December. Known for documenting southern estates, he insisted on photographing Harrowsend for a new historical record publication. He was warned off, of course, but Knox, a proud skeptic, considered the stories exaggerated. "Ghosts are just poor insulation," he famously said. He entered Harrowsend one Sunday morning with his camera and 4 glass plates. He never came back, but his camera did. A week later, a boy from town found it leaning against the Harrowsend gate. The leather strap was neatly looped around the iron bars. Inside the case were 3 cracked plates and 1 intact image. The image horrified even the most skeptical. It showed the front foyer of Harrowsend, but something was off. The chandelier above was twisted, as if it had spun violently and froze mid-motion. The stair railings were warped, but worst of all was the figure near the top of the stairs, tall, stooped, wearing a long dark coat. Its head was bent at an unnatural angle, and where a face should have been, the image melted into a smear of shadow. No one could say for sure what the thing was. Some claimed it was Elias. Others said it was something else, something that had been inside the house long before Elias ever came. After that photograph, even the most stubborn doubters stopped denying Harrowsend's hold on the land. And still, no one went in. Not until Past, or Whitmore. He believed faith could cleanse the house. He'd regret that belief before the week was over. Pastor Samuel Whitmore arrived in the spring of 1853 with a worn Bible in one hand and conviction burning in his chest. He was known across 3 counties for cleansing haunted barns and chasing out the devil from sickly children. But Harrowsend was different, and everyone told him so. Whitmore, however, believed that fear was simply the absence of faith. He'd heard the rumors. He knew about the missing governess, the dead stable boy, the twisted photograph. Still, he insisted on visiting the Harrows in person. "No evil can withstand the word," he said to his congregation the Sunday before. "I will pray in every room, and this house will be reclaimed." He took no one with him, just a wooden cross, a jug of holy water, and his journal. According to the notes he left behind, the first hour inside Harrowsend was quiet. Dust lay thick across the hallways, and the furniture was untouched, like it had been frozen in time. The air was dry and heavy, as if the house had exhaled once and never inhaled again. Whitmore described hearing a faint melody, something like a music box or an old lullaby, coming from upstairs. When he followed the sound, it stopped abruptly. He opened the door to what he believed was the children's nursery. It was empty. But the rocking horse in the corner was still moving. He wrote that down. He also noted the cracked mirror over the fireplace, where his reflection didn't move in sync with him. He tried to ignore it. At sundown, Whitmore attempted a full house blessing, moving from room to room, reciting scripture. It was in the dining hall that things changed. The table, once pristine, was now set, with rotten food, rusted silverware, and 5 small porcelain plates. On each plate was a lock of hair, and seated at the table were the Harrow children, or something wearing their faces. Whitmore's journal ends mid-sentence. "Lord, give me strength. It's watching. It knows my name." He was never seen again. But his Bible was found a week later, open to Revelations. The pages were soaked in brine. After Pastor Whitmore vanished, the town of Belcroft held a closed-door meeting. No notes, no press, no outsiders. What was decided behind those stone walls has never been revealed, but the aftermath was clear. A wide, unofficial perimeter was drawn around Harrowsend. Roads leading to the estate were quietly rerouted, trees were planted thick along the fence line, and local maps were reprinted with the house labeled simply as "Private Property, No Entry." It wasn't just fear anymore. It was containment. But Harrowsend didn't care about fences. In early summer, A traveling tinker named Miles Redfern set up shop just outside the woods near the estate. He claimed to have old eyes and could fix anything mechanical, from watches to wagons. Locals found him peculiar but harmless. That changed one evening when he stumbled into the town tavern, barefoot and wild-eyed, carrying something wrapped in burlap. He slammed it on the bar. It was a music box, identical to the one described in Whitmore's journal. Redfern claimed he'd found it in a tree, nailed to the inside of a hollow trunk like a shrine. When he opened it, it played a soft lullaby. But it wasn't music, he whispered. It was breathing, gentle, like a child sleeping, but not human. The barkeep ordered him out. That same night, Redfern was seen heading back toward the woods. He was never seen again. 2 days later, children in Belcroft began sleepwalking. 6 of them were found standing in the churchyard just before dawn, all facing east, all humming the same lullaby. None remembered how they got there. Their parents begged the mayor to burn the Harrow estate to the ground. But it was too late. Harrowsend no longer needed visitors to feed. It had grown roots that could reach through dreams into bloodlines, through lullabies whispered generations deep. And still, no one knew exactly what had started it. Only one person might have known. Silas Harrow, the eldest son, now a man grown, and the only Harrow seen in town after 1850. He'd returned once more, and this time he spoke. Silas Harrow walked back into Belcroft in the fall of 1853, just as the leaves began to blacken on the trees. No one saw him arrive, no carriage, no horse, no sound of footsteps. He simply was, standing in the center of the town square at dawn, dressed in a faded gray coat and a scarf soaked at the edges. The blacksmith was the first to approach him, recognizing the gaunt, pale face from decades-old memories. But something was wrong. Silas's eyes didn't look into people. They looked through them, as if they were no more solid than mist. He didn't answer questions, didn't explain his sudden appearance. He only asked for the church key. When the pastor refused, Silas spoke again, but not in English. The language he used was jagged, like broken glass scraping along stone. Birds scattered from the bell tower. The windows of the church cracked, and every child within 5 miles woke up screaming. The town reluctantly gave him the key. Silas entered the church alone and remained there for 3 days. No food, no water. When someone dared to peek inside, they saw him sitting at the altar with candles in a perfect circle around him, eyes closed, mouth moving in prayer, or perhaps something far older. On the 3rd night, lightning struck the church. It didn't burn, but the steeple twisted like wax beneath heat, and the bell cracked straight down the middle. When the townspeople finally pushed the doors open, Silas was gone. But in his place, carved deep into the altar, were 7 names. Each belonged to a child. Each one disappeared before the week was out. The town fell silent after that. No more parties, no more visitors, and Harrowsend, silent for weeks, began to sing again. Low, mournful melodies echoed across the fields, heard only at dusk, always carried by wind that smelled faintly of the sea. Silas was never seen again, but his voice, his presence, lingered. And within the walls of Harrowsend, something old began to stir, awake now, fully, and ready to be known. The lullabies returned in full by the winter of 1853, but they no longer sounded soft. The melodies became distorted, notes bending strangely, like a child humming underwater. Locals reported hearing them inside their homes, even when the windows were closed. Doors would creak open by themselves at night, and children began talking in their sleep, whispering things in languages their parents didn't recognize. Something ancient had awoken. At the heart of it all stood Harrowsend, untouched but ever watchful. Its windows, though dark, always seemed to glint at dusk, as if reflecting not the sun, but eyes. When Dr. Calvin Mercer, a scholar from Boston, arrived to investigate, he dismissed the town's hysteria as mass delusion. A Harvard man, Mercer believed in reason and brought with him maps, journals, and a brass instrument he claimed could measure spiritual vibrations. He entered Harrowsend on December 21st. What returned wasn't Mercer. 3 days later, the town's gravedigger spotted a man crawling from the edge of the estate's overgrown orchard. His clothes were torn, his fingers bloodied, and his hair had turned white. He spoke only once. "They are older than God," he whispered, eyes fixed skyward. "They sleep in the salt. They dream in the walls." He died minutes later, bleeding from his ears and nose. His notes, found in a satchel at the estate's gate, painted a horrifying picture. Mercer had followed a sound, a low, pulsing thrum, through the corridors of Harrowsend. The deeper he went, the more time seemed to fold. Clocks reversed, doors opened into rooms that hadn't existed, and beneath the house he discovered something he never fully described, only called it the cradle. He scrawled a final passage before the ink turned to smudges. "They are not ghosts. They are echoes made flesh. They remember when the sea covered this land. They were worshipped, then buried, forgotten. But the lullabies woke them." After Mercer's death, Belcroft's mayor ordered every record of Harrowsend erased from the public register, but erasure didn't matter, because the house remembered everything. And soon, it would show everyone. By the early months of 1854, Harrowsend was no longer just a place. It had become an infection, not biological, but psychic. People who'd never visited the estate began sketching its floor plans in their sleep. Children recited names of rooms they'd never entered. Farmers, hundreds of miles away, claimed to dream of staircases spiraling downward into oceans of teeth. The contagion was spreading, quietly, elegantly, and with purpose. That's when Evelyn Gray, a linguist and cryptologist from New Haven, was drawn to Belcroft by rumor and desperation. She had been translating ancient seafaring tablets, remnants of pre-flood civilizations, when she began to notice something odd. The lullabies heard near Harrowsend matched rhythmic notations found on those stone fragments. Impossible. The tablets were over 10,000 years old. Evelyn traveled to Harrowsend with her assistant, Tom Linley, determined to trace the melody's origin. They camped on the outskirts, too cautious to step directly into the house. But on the second night, the music found them. Evelyn awoke at 3:17 a.m. to find Tom missing. His tent was torn open, not violently, but surgically, each seam carefully undone. A trail of damp footprints, barefoot and small, led toward the trees. She followed them. What she found wasn't Tom, but dozens of children standing silently beneath the boughs. Their mouths were moving, but no sound came out, just the steady hiss of wind through leaves. Then, a single voice, behind her, spoke her name. She turned and saw Tom, or at least a version of him. His eyes were entirely black. His skin glistened like it had just been pulled from deep water. He smiled too wide, and when he reached for her, his fingers weren't fingers anymore. They were roots. Evelyn fled. She never stopped running. She returned to New Haven a week later, aged beyond her years. She sealed away her notes and told no one what she saw. But before she vanished from public life, she wrote a final letter to a colleague. "They are not ghosts, not demons. They are memories made hungry, and Harrowsend is their temple." By mid-1854, Harrowsend was no longer the subject of whispered folklore. It had become a name that scholars, mystics, and even certain government officials began to circle in red ink. Something was happening in Belcroft, something wrong, and the estate stood at its heart like a rotten tooth in a beautiful mouth. A team was dispatched, not by the town, but by a private European order known only as the Ostra Society. Secretive, well-funded, and older than most countries, the society specialized in containment of unexplainable architecture. They sent Dr. Felix Moreau, a French antiquarian who had previously sealed a monastery in the Pyrenees after its monks began speaking backward in unison. Moreau didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in patterns. Arriving in Belcroft, he studied the town's shifting reports, children singing sea hymns, elderly speaking in dead dialects, compass needles spinning within 20 miles of the house. Most disturbing of all were the birth records, a surge in stillbirths, all on nights when the tides pulled furthest from shore. He visited Harrowsend on the new moon. Only one witness saw him enter. None saw him leave. But 12 days later, the society received a single envelope. No return address. Inside, a torn page from Moreau's journal. It held only a sketch, a crude, frantic drawing of a spiral staircase descending into a throat made of wood and bone. At the bottom stood a door. A single phrase was scrawled beneath it. They do not sleep. They only wait. After that, the Ostra Society blacklisted Harrowsend. It was labeled a level 6 structure, irreparable and awake. Orders were given never to interfere again. Belcroft, meanwhile, tried to bury the truth. They cut down roads, erased records, and told their children nothing. But it didn't matter. The stories endured, passed down in bedtime warnings, in songs not meant to be sung aloud. And beneath Harrowsend, the cradle, that place Dr. Mercer never described, kept expanding, waiting for a visitor who wouldn't run. One who might finally open that door. For decades after the Ostra Society's retreat, Harrowsend remained untouched. Locals dared not step near it, and outsiders who came seeking thrill or fame often vanished, or worse, returned as something unrecognizable. But in 1892, a man arrived not out of curiosity but out of vengeance. His name was Jonathan Vale. He claimed that his sister, Clara, had disappeared in Belcroft 20 years prior. Locals insisted she'd run off with a merchant, but Jonathan had proof, her journal, recovered by a drifter, describing the songs, the lights, and a hidden door beneath the estate. Jonathan was a civil engineer by trade, a man of precise measurements and reinforced logic. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in answers. So he entered Harrowsend with maps, blueprints, and a 6-man crew. Only Jonathan returned. He emerged from the house 13 hours later, barefoot, his clothing soaked in brine, even though it hadn't rained in days. His crew? Never seen again. He carried a leather case filled with papers, all warped from moisture. Most were indecipherable, but a few remained legible. Sketches of tunnels, strange inscriptions, and floor plans that shifted mid-page, as though the house had redrawn itself while he watched. His most chilling note described a heartbeat. Not metaphorical, literal. He wrote of placing his hand on the stone walls beneath the basement, feeling a slow, rhythmic thump. He timed it, 1 beat every 94 seconds. He called it the womb beneath the wood. After that, Jonathan vanished from public life. Some say he went mad. Others claim he returned to the house one final time and was accepted. His last recorded words were scrawled on the back of a torn blueprint. "It isn't haunted, it's gestating." For Harrowsend wasn't just a cursed estate, it was becoming something. And the house was only the skin. What lay inside, beneath the floors, behind the walls, was growing. And it was learning the shape of us. By the turn of the century, Harrowsend's legend had reached further than Belcroft. It appeared in occult journals, sea captain logs, and whispered folklore from Maine to Morocco. Its name became a curse among certain circles, spoken only at midnight, never twice in one breath. But in 1901, it attracted the attention of a very different type of visitor, Adelaide Cross, famed photographer of the forgotten, known for capturing images of places history tried to erase, abandoned battlefields, drowned chapels, ruins no map acknowledged. Adelaide was drawn to Harrowsend not for its horrors, but for its silence. She believed some buildings remembered things, and that a photograph could make them confess. She arrived on October 3rd, armed with 3 cameras and an assistant, Malcolm Reeve. For the first day, she refused to step inside, instead circling the property, snapping pictures of angles others had ignored, chimney shadows, warped shutters, the crooked iron gate leaning toward the marsh like it was listening. But it was the second day that cracked her. She found a door that hadn't been there before. Nestled between 2 crumbling columns on the eastern wall, Adelaide swore it hadn't existed the day before. It was made of black wood, carved with swirling shapes like tendrils or roots. No knob, just a keyhole, and around it the brick pulsed with condensation, as if the house was breathing. She didn't open it, but she pressed her ear to it. What she heard made her stumble back. Not voices, not even music, but a cry. A newborn's. Malcolm never saw the door. In fact, when he developed the film later that week, not a single image showed it. The bricks were bare. But Adelaide knew, and when she developed her final roll, the last picture, taken of the west-facing window, came back different. Inside the frame was a figure, tall, distorted, standing inside the house, watching, and in the palm of its hand, it held something, a key. Adelaide quit photography 2 weeks later. Her final diary entry read, "It wanted me to see it, to find it, but not yet, not until it's ready." In 1923, Harrowsend fell briefly silent. No sightings, no whispers, no disappearances. For nearly 8 months, the house stood undisturbed, its windows black, its gardens wild, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, 5 children vanished from Belcroft. All in one night, all from different homes. The only thing connecting them, each had sleepwalked before, and each had, days earlier, begun humming a lullaby no one had taught them. Panic gripped the town. For the first time in nearly 70 years, a formal search party was formed. Volunteers, local officials, and even clergy were called in. They gathered at dawn on the Harrowsend property line, crossing it together, carrying torches and prayers. Only 7 of the 18 who entered returned. The rest weren't lost. They were altered. Father Elric Hayes, who led the group, came back clutching a single item, a child's shoe soaked in seawater. He wouldn't speak for a full week. When he finally did, he claimed the house had grown, that its holes twisted mid-step and stairwells folded into themselves. He described hearing giggles echoing from beneath the floorboards, giggles that turned to sobs, then to voices whispering, "We're not children anymore." One man, Frank Ellerby, spoke of mirrors that didn't reflect the present. In one, he saw his own mother, long dead, begging him to leave. In another, he saw himself, aged and decayed, crawling toward the camera with eyes scratched out. The townsfolk demanded answers. They wanted the estate burned, demolished, buried. But no one could approach it again. The land surrounding Harrowsend became slick, impossible to grip, like oil over marble. Matches wouldn't light near its walls. Machinery stalled. The house had decided it would not be destroyed. And worse, it had started collecting. Of the 5 missing children, only one was Eve, found. Little Marion Dorsey, discovered sleeping peacefully on the chapel steps, eyes open, humming. Her hair had turned white, and etched into the skin of her left palm were the words, "I remember the sea." By 1931, Harrowsend had slipped past the boundary of folklore and entered something far more unsettling: myth with teeth. Belcroft's residents didn't speak of it anymore, not out of fear, but out of reverence, as if acknowledging the house might wake it up again. But Harrowsend didn't sleep. It listened. That year, a team of radio engineers from Boston were tasked with mapping silent zones along the eastern seaboard, places where signal mysteriously dropped. Belcroft was one of them. Their data showed something extraordinary. Within a 1-mile radius of Harrowsend, shortwave frequencies warped into static. But not random static. Patterns. The team's lead, Edward Ballantyne, was a wartime communications expert. He recognized rhythm when he heard it. The frequencies around Harrowsend pulsed like language: pauses, repetition, rise and fall. A code. He recorded hours of it, convinced it was man-made, perhaps an old beacon or Soviet interference. But when he and his assistant decoded a 5-minute segment, they found something impossible. The child must knock 3 times, not before moonrise, not after breath stills, only then. Ballantyne laughed it off, until that night when their van parked near the estate shut down entirely. All electronics died. Even their mechanical watch hands froze. Then, on the tape they'd left running, a new sound emerged. Knocking. 3 sharp knocks. Not on metal. Not on wood. On bone. The audio was sent to MIT for analysis. Their findings? The knocks matched the resonant frequency of human femur, as if something had struck bone to communicate. 2 weeks later, Ballantyne disappeared. Only his assistant remained, catatonic, scribbling circles over and over in a hotel Bible. On the final page, he wrote, "It speaks through silence, it moves through memory, and it doesn't want to be found. Not yet." Belcroft was never added to the official silent zones. Not because it wasn't one, but because it was the only one where the silence spoke back. And somewhere beneath Harrowsend, a voice was learning to imitate our own. In 1947, shortly after World War II, Harrowsend's name appeared in a confidential memo issued by the newly formed Office of Paranormal Surveillance, an experimental American agency tasked with cataloging unexplainable sights across the country. It was listed under Category Red, Uncontainable Phenomena. The file was brief, but damning. Dozens of local disappearances, structural anomalies, sensory manipulation, and, most alarmingly, cognitive distortion. Agents who visited the estate described their minds slipping, memories warping, and thoughts that weren't their own. One agent, Kenneth Rulick, was assigned to the Belcroft station. He lasted 6 days. On the 7th, he mailed a single, unmarked envelope to his supervisor. Inside were photographs, grainy, low-exposure shots of the Harrowsend property at night. Most were uneventful, except the last one. It showed the front porch. A figure stood there, not in clothes, but in skin. Folded, stitched, impossibly human, but hollow, like something wearing the idea of a person. Written on the back of the photo, in trembling script, was a line. "It's trying out different shapes, deciding what to be." The photo vanished from federal archives 5 years later. Rulick was never seen again. But strange behavior began manifesting in Belcroft's children. Not the typical fear or fascination. Something else. Recognition. Several students were found sketching diagrams of floor plans they'd never seen. One girl, only 7, drew an image of the estate's basement, complete with an additional room no adult could verify. When asked where she'd seen it, she replied, "In the dream where the house sings." Her drawing showed no doors, just walls with mouths. Local psychologists dismissed the incidents as shared trauma or group hysteria. But one child's mother later discovered saltwater stains on his bedsheets, despite them living over 40 miles from the ocean. And each night, when he awoke screaming, he repeated the same phrase. The house wants a name. It's building a mouth to say it. What is born in silence does not remain voiceless, and Harrowsend was not haunted. It was practicing. By 1958, Harrowsend had gained a new kind of visitor, not the curious, not the lost, but the believers. A fringe cult calling themselves the Hollow Choir arrived in Belcroft under the guise of spiritual seekers. Dressed in worn linen robes and carrying no luggage, they claimed to have heard the song of the sea that lives on land. They spoke of Harrowsend not as a place, but as a being, a god in mid-formation, and they called it by a name no outsider could pronounce, only hum. Locals were unnerved, but within a week, the cult vanished behind the estate's crumbling iron gate. They were never seen again. Until one morning, nearly a month later, when every bell in Belcroft rang at once. Church bells, school bells, fire alarms, anything that could sound did. No hands touched them, no wind, just sudden, synchronized chimes. The town woke in terror. And on the road, just beyond Harrowsend's grounds, someone had left a trail of salt. It curved, twisted, then stopped abruptly at the tree line. At the end of the trail was a body, or what remained of one. The figure had no eyes, no tongue, no ears, just smooth skin where features should be. Across the chest, carved deeply, was the phrase, "The choir sings within now." Experts called it ritualistic murder. But something didn't add up. The body bore no signs of entry, no incisions, no removal, as if the face had simply forgotten how to form. Days later, a group of teenagers dared each other to enter Harrowsend. One had a handheld tape recorder. Only one returned. Mute. The tape was later played for investigators. Most of it was garbled static. But at the end, there were voices, multiple. Singing, not in melody, but in mimicry, as if learning how to speak by imitating prayer. And among the layered voices, one sentence cut through like a knife. We are shaping it in our image. Not the other way around. Harrowsend wasn't becoming more human. We were becoming more like it. In 1966, a famed documentary filmmaker named Caleb Merrin arrived in Belcroft. Known for his work on post-war trauma and societal decay, Merrin had heard rumors about Harrowsend for years. He intended to create a short film, not about ghosts, but about the psychology of forbidden spaces. His crew of 4 brought modern equipment, sound booms, wind filters, backup reels, lighting rigs. The plan was simple: document the house's exterior, interview residents, capture its presence. They entered the property line at dawn. By dusk, only Caleb emerged. His clothing was shredded, not torn by hands, but frayed as though it had been washed in sand and brine. He wouldn't speak for hours. When he finally did, he asked a single question. Did the house exist before the town, or did the town grow to feed it? He then handed over the footage, insisting he wanted nothing more to do with it. What the reels showed didn't match the crew's entry. Instead of clean, chronological shots, the film was warped, looping, self-referential. One camera caught the same stretch of hallway repeating endlessly, except each repetition added something: a new photograph on the wall, a faint hum, a dark shape at the far end growing closer. Another reel captured an upstairs bedroom. The walls pulsated like lungs. Whispered audio bled through, layering over itself. One voice whispered, "I used to dream of leaving. Now I only dream within." At the film's midpoint, the sound engineer, Gavin Trask, can be seen approaching a mirror. But his reflection doesn't move. It stares at the camera, smiling. When Gavin turns back to look at his reflection, the mirror is blank. And then, just frames before the reel ends, he's gone. Not screaming, not fleeing, erased. Like a character written out of reality. The footage was shelved, never aired. The studio that funded the project declared it incomplete and compromised. Marin retired soon after. He never filmed again. But before his death in 1983, he left a final note in his journal. Harrowsend isn't a haunted house, it's a prototype, a draft version of something worse. By 1973, Belcroft had unofficially marked Harrowsend as off-limits. The county fenced the land, citing structural hazards, but no official demolition was ordered. That same year, architecture professor Dr. Helena Greaves from Cambridge published a private paper titled Harrowsend as Non-Euclidean Memory Construct. It wasn't academic curiosity that brought her to the estate. It was obsession. Her grandfather, one of the original builders, vanished in 1904 before the mansion's final wing was completed. She believed the house had rewritten its own structure after he disappeared. Helena gained access under the guise of historical preservation. She brought floor plans, thermal scanners, and measuring drones. What she found didn't match any blueprint. Rooms appeared in one visit, vanished the next. Ceilings shifted height by the hour. A hallway on the second floor led into what should have been thin air, yet opened into a basement she'd never mapped. That basement had no stairs. Only a ladder made of human tibias, fused together and coated in something that breathed. She descended anyway. The space below didn't feel underground. It felt underthought, as if spatial rules had been traded in for symbolic logic, each corner bent with intent, each shadow cast like a decision. On the far wall, written in salt, were the words, "You are not the architect. You are the ingredient." She turned to leave, but found her exit gone. Instead, she was back in the same room she'd first entered, but her equipment was rotted, aged decades in seconds. The air smelled of seawater and spoiled milk. She stumbled out through a door she swore hadn't been there before. The footage she brought back was analyzed at MIT. Time codes jumped, clocks reversed, and one frame clearly showed her standing in front of a mirror, smiling. Except she wasn't smiling in real life, and her reflection on had two shadows. Helena was later hospitalized for what doctors called architectural delusion. She never entered another building again. For the rest of her life, she only lived in tents. When asked why, she answered, "I won't give it walls. I won't give it me." In 1989, paranormal researcher and radio host Milo Varnes aired a series called Structures That Shouldn't Exist. Episode 5 focused entirely on Harrowsend, and was the only broadcast the FCC ever demanded be removed from all public archives. Listeners who tuned in described bizarre symptoms, nausea, vertigo, migraines. A few reported hearing knocking on their walls while the episode played, despite living alone. The episode itself has become an underground legend, but a leaked transcript survives. Milo interviews an anonymous caller, someone claiming to have lived inside Harrowsend for 4 days. The caller said they weren't trapped. They were invited. They spoke of waking up in different rooms every morning, even though they hadn't moved. Doors appeared when they needed water. A warm fire burned when they grew cold. And yet, something felt off. The windows showed skies that didn't match the time of day. One afternoon, they looked out to find an ocean horizon, despite Belcroft being landlocked. The house, they said, was learning, mirroring comfort, offering familiarity, but beneath that kindness was calculation. On the third day, the walls began to whisper, not in words, but in choices. You may open the red door or the blue door. If you open neither, you will feed the root. The caller chose the blue. Behind it was a dining room, a table set for one, a note on the plate. "Welcome home, Milo." Milo asked the caller how the house knew his name. There was a pause. Then the caller said, "It's not just a place. It's a version, a draft of something that keeps being written until it's right." When Milo asked if the caller had left the house, they laughed, a dry, wrong laugh. "I'm still in it. We all are. This call is just a window." The episode ended mid-sentence, dead air for 23 minutes. When Milo tried to air a follow-up, his studio Mista riotously flooded with salt water. Equipment destroyed. No explanation. Milo retired 2 weeks later, disappeared from public life. Some say he bought a cabin in Belcroft. Others say he never made it out of the house at all. In 1999, as the world braced for the turn of the millennium, a linguist named Dr. Elira Mott became obsessed with what she called resonant structures, places designed not just to house bodies, but to amplify memory. She believed Harrowsend was one such structure, but more than that, she suspected it was a phonetic engine, a house built to speak itself into permanence. According to her research, every generation had left behind a name for the mansion. Not a legal one, but a whispered one. A name no two sources spelled the same, yet all pronounced the same way. A deep, throaty exhale followed by a clicking hum. Unwritable, but unmistakable. Elira called this the word that stays. She theorized that Harrowsend wasn't haunted. It was haunting itself into existence, feeding on repetition, stories, retellings. A myth becomes a map, she wrote, and a map, if drawn enough, becomes territory. Elira traveled to Belcroft and camped near the estate. She didn't go inside. Instead, she broadcast live audio recordings for 40 nights, capturing the sounds from its foundation: wind, creaks, subtle groans. On the 23rd night, she caught a new sound. A voice, not hers, not human. Not one, but many, speaking in a synchronized, slow chant. We name it so it won't name us. We speak it so it won't be alone. We listen, because it remembers. Elira was never seen again. But her final recording, just seconds long, surfaces occasionally online. It begins with static, then the sound of a door opening, and then laughter. Not mocking, not joyful, practicing, like a child mimicking human emotion. Finally, a whisper. We were never afraid of ghosts. We were afraid of the house learning how to become one. A search of Elira's abandoned tent found a single sheet of paper, blank except for a note. Harrowsend is a rehearsal. When it gets the performance right, it won't need the stage anymore. The house is still there, waiting, listening. Every time you tell its story, it sharpens. Every time you repeat its name, it grows clearer. In 2004, a real estate developer named Raylan Joss purchased the Harrowsend property for just $1. He planned to demolish it and build luxury villas. He told reporters, "There's no such thing as cursed land, just undervalued land." The week before demolition, Raylan hosted a private walkthrough with investors. 12 people entered the mansion that afternoon. Only 11 came out. The missing man, Elliot Price, left behind his phone. Its last video, blurred, shaken, was 32 seconds long. It shows Elliot walking through a hallway that shouldn't exist. Every frame warps slightly, like the footage is resisting playback. At the end, the camera tilts down, revealing footprints, not leading forward, leading toward him. One by one, freshly formed, as though something was walking backward into his space. Then, static. The next morning, demolition crews arrived, but the house was gone. not destroyed, missing. The foundation remained intact, but the structure had vanished. No rubble, no scorch marks, not even nails. Where the walls once stood was only flattened grass and salt. That night, townsfolk reported strange phenomena. Their ceilings dripped salt water. Old family photos had extra people in the background. One man opened his fridge to find a locked door behind the eggs. And every radio in Belcroft, no matter the channel, played the same faint sound at midnight. A slow heartbeat. Then the words, "Tell them, or it will." Since then, stories about Harrowsend have spread online like spores. Videos, podcasts, forums, urban legends. And now, this one. And that's the thing, isn't it? You're watching this, thinking it's just a story, just another eerie tale. But the more it's spoken, the more real it becomes. Because Harrowsend never needed bricks. It just needed retellings. It needed you to speak its name, to feed the memory, to help it remember what it was meant to become. So now that you know, what was that knock at your door just now? Was it the wind? Or did something finally learn how to leave the blueprint?